Hey everybody, welcome to Mistake Man. This video is part 3 of my USS Voyager model build. In the last video I did a lot of the photo etching on the kit. Not all of it, there's still a little bit left to do, but I did the majority of it. In this video I'm going to be making additional modifications to the kit. So I just want to jump in and start talking about what I've done already. First up, I want to talk about my inspiration for a lot of these modifications to this kit. There's a modeler named Ian Lawrence who I think is pretty well known in the community, and he has a website where he posts build logs of many model kits that he's built over the years. And I understand that he passed away recently, but as of recording this video his website is still up. But who knows how long that will remain to be the case. But when I was going through some of his build logs, one of the ones he did was for the USS Voyager. I noticed all the changes that he was making to the model kit, modifications to the existing model, but also additions for some missing details. And I figured most of that stuff, if not all, I could do myself. And so it's kind of his version of the build kind of became my standard. That's what I'm shooting for, is kind of what he did. Now, I don't know if he ever finished the model, because the build log for this kit on his site only had 3 pages, and it wasn't complete. So either he never finished the log, or he never finished the model. I don't know, but I'm going to use the progress that he did make as my inspiration for what I'm doing here. So if you saw my last video, you might notice that there are some additions that I've already made, and you can see them mostly here in the white details that were missing before. So for these, there are just some kind of just raised lines on the original filming model that are not on this kit. The ones here on the front, these 6, are symmetric from the port side to the starboard side, but this pair back here are not. And I think it just comes down to the fact that the bridge deck itself is not symmetrical. To create the lines, I used like I said, some stock styrene, and this was what I used, the 0.5 millimeter by 0.5 millimeter strips. So they're a square profile. They do look a little bit heavy, and I don't know if the camera's picking this up. Yeah, it doesn't look too bad, but if you compare like this line to this line, you'll see that this one and this one look just a little bit thicker than this one. And that's not down to the styrene that I used. It's the exact same. 0.5 millimeter by 0.5 millimeter styrene in both places. But for the ones on this side up through here, I've actually rounded over the corners, so it's not really a square anymore. But I haven't done that on these ones yet. And so just rounding off those corners kind of lightened up those lines a little bit. I've also added a kind of raised portion. There's going to be a light right here, and I haven't drilled the hole for the light yet. I'll do that when I'm ready to kind of start figuring out the lighting. I've also added a few details here, just with that same 0.5 by 0.5 millimeter styrene. It's interesting that in most of the places on this model, those little details are already here, and they are pretty accurate where they're located. But for whatever reason, they just missed these 3, well, these 6. The 3 on each side. So I don't know that I ever would have noticed those were missing, but Ian did notice, and he had those on his. And since they were showing up in white in his build photos, they stood out to me. So also added these features back here. And let's see, these were, okay, those are made of this 1/2 inch thick by 2.5 inch, sorry, not inches. 0.5 millimeter thick by 2.5 millimeter wide styrene, strip styrene. And for those, I just kind of trimmed the corner of each. They just didn't look quite right when they had nice sharp corners. I don't know, they just didn't look quite right. So I did trim those down, just kind of, with my knife at a 45-degree angle on each of those corners. I think it just, especially from afar, it just ends up looking better. And then there are also similar details down here. I did not see these on Ian's build, but I did notice them on the filming model of Voyager. So I decided to go ahead and add those. Also, there are a couple of lifeboats that go back here, and the Green Strawberry Photo Etch kit includes some 4 lifeboats for you to put back here, and you can see that I've put these 2. The other one doesn't really fit well here because of the curvature in this model. It just ends up being kind of lifted up. It doesn't sit flat. And I've seen other modelers, they'll kind of like bend that to fit on there, and I don't like the look of that. And you could move it farther over here maybe, but I didn't really like the look of that either, so I just decided to leave it off. And it really comes down to this model kit has different curvature right here than the filming model. The filming model is much smoother transition across here, and it's not quite flat, but it's definitely much flatter than what we have here. Just that difference in this model kit makes it so that those lifeboats really just don't fit well there. Another detail I've added that I also saw that Ian had on his build were these little details, which are on the filming model, but not in this original mold of this kit. Anyway, so those are the modifications I've made so far. One of the other things that Ian Lawrence did on his Voyager was create some 3D printed parts to replace details on this kit. Most of what he made are improved versions of the phaser banks. The phasers that are on here are not too bad. The only detail that's really missing from these is these are completely smooth, but in the filming model there are tiny little ridges all down the length of the phasers. And I guess Ian decided he wanted to add that detail, so he actually created 3D models of all the phasers, and he printed them out and replaced them on his model. But he also made the STL files, the 3D model files, available on his website for anyone to download if they want to do the same. So I decided, yeah, what the heck, I'll go for it. So I printed up my own version of the files that Ian provided. And you can see these still have all the supports on them. I'm going to leave them on here just because they're long and thin and would easily break, and they're just stronger while they're being supported. I'll take them off when I'm ready to actually put them on the model. But if we look up close to these, you can see those ridge details I was talking about that run all along the length. Let's see, I think that one goes right here. So that's the starboard dorsal main phaser bank. This is the port. And then for the dorsal, or for the ventral on the primary hull, there's the starboard one. And the port one. And then there are a handful of others across the ship. There's these little guys in the back. And I've got, I think those are the right length, yeah. So I've got that one there. I've got 2 of those. There are some phasers on the warp pylons. I think this is the underside, so the ventral side. And I've got one there. And this one I did take off the support just for testing. There's 2 of those. And I've actually already got this one in place. So I've removed the original feature from there. And then for the fan tail, this is also the ventral side, the underside. There's these 2. And these are shorter than the others, and they have a slight curve to them. You can see that. They're not straight. All the other ones are straight, well, with the exception of the big guys. But all the other little guys are straight, except for these 2. And for the underside of the primary hole, there's one of these on each side. So these short phasers are not all the same length. There are 3 different lengths. And I think Ian calls them out by he names them by their lengths. I think the short guy is a 15 millimeter. The middle guy is 20 millimeter. And the longest guy I think is 23 millimeters. And like I said, the 15 millimeter, the shorter one, is curved, where the other 2 are straight. And they're not all the same quantities either. So for the 15 millimeter, these are the only 2 on the model that have the 15 millimeter, so you only need 2 of those. The 20 millimeter go on the bottom side of the primary hole, and there's just 2 of those, 1 on each side. And then the 23 millimeter, you actually need 4 of those, because those go on the warp pylons. Those are 23. And so there's 2, 1 for each warp pylon. And they're only on the top or the bottom of the warp pylon. The top of the warp pylon does not have a phaser strip. And then for the back side of the primary hole, the top, those are also the 23. Now, I do believe that Ian says otherwise. He kind of gives a PDF that tells you how many of each size of these phaser strips you should print that you'll need for the kit. And I think he says you need 4 of the 20 millimeter and only 2 of the 23. But when I measured all the phaser banks on my model kit, there are 4 of the 23 and only 2 of the 20. So that's what I printed. That's what I'm going to do on my kit. I think where the difference comes in is these ones on the warp pylons, where they are the same length as the 23. I think these are longer than they should be compared to the filming model. I did double check the filming model, and it does look like these are actually shorter on the real deal, if you will. So I think when they made this model kit, they just made these longer for some reason. The proportions of the stuff here are not, they're a little off. Like these impulse engines are a little bit too long on this kit. They are shorter on the filming model. Phaser strips are shorter. The layout of these panels is slightly different, but I didn't want to try and readjust all of that geometry here. I'm just going to leave it as is, and so I just went with the 23 just to do a 1-to-1 replacement here. Ian also provides STL files, 3D model files for 2 other parts of this kit, and one is the deflector, and this is his version of the deflector. I've already taken it off the supports. Haven't really cleaned it up too much in the back. Most of that can't be seen, so I'm not too worried about it, but I might, when it gets time to actually put that in, I'll probably clean it up a little bit. But anyway, so that's his version of the deflector. And if we compare that to what comes with the monogram kit, where it's the clear piece here, he's adjusted the geometry quite a bit. So his idea was to try and make it a little bit more, as close as he could to the filming model. And I think he did a good job. This definitely looks much more accurate. And then the last part that Ian created is for the auxiliary deflector, the secondary deflector on the saucer. And that looks like that. Kind of. So now I will say I have modified this. This is not Ian's version. I took Ian's version and I made some changes to it. His version had the little bracket that comes out the back. Because I have the photo etch kit and it has some parts for that bracket, it looked like this. The idea is this would go on the back like that. And since I already have the photo etch kit, I figured I would use that. And so I modified the 3D model that he provided and took that bracket off. And it also looked a little bit too deep, like this front portion on my version here. This front portion on my version here is much shallower than what he had. So this is the version that comes with the kit. You can see how deep that is. And Ian's was, I don't know if it was quite as deep as the version that comes with the kit, but it was still pretty deep, and it just didn't look quite right to me. And since I was removing that bracket in the back, I decided to go ahead and shallow up this the depth of this front feature just to make it look a little bit more accurate to my eyes, to what the photos that I saw of the studio model. I think I may have also adjusted the depth because I knew that I was going to be attaching it to this photo etch piece. Oh, I forgot one other phaser that he made a 3D model of, and this is for the ventral phaser on the secondary hull. And that replaces this phaser that goes across both halves of the secondary hull. Now this is going to be quite a bit of work, removing all the phasers on this model. The smaller ones are not too bad. Like this one, it only took a little while, but this is a smaller one. When it comes time to doing the ones on the primary hull, that's going to take a while. Just because I have to grind away at the existing one to remove it. And it's interesting, the way they're molded in, they have this kind of recess on the inside here, and when you end up grinding that away, it actually leaves a hole right there, which is actually not too bad. Once I got the phaser placed on there, I put some of the thin CA glue underneath to glue it in place. Then I flipped it over, and where the hole was, I just put a bunch of glue in there to kind of really lock that guy down, glue it on there well. In this portion of the hull, there's this wide recess here that goes around, and on the filming model there are some recessed circular features that are spaced out in a pattern along that, and you can see I've started to add those. Those were not in the original mold of this kit, and there would be more here. You can see I haven't added those yet, but I have marked their locations with just pushed a little pin to mark those. And then here as well, there's one there, there, and there. And then all along this side. So I've completed this one side here. These were a bit of a challenge because I had to figure out exactly how to add that feature. There probably exist tools that could make a little hole like that. I couldn't just use a drill bit because a drill bit has an angled tip, so that's going to make a hole with an angled bottom. And that's not what I want here. I want the bottom of the hole to be flat and quite shallow. I don't really have a tool that can just do that. Like I said, there probably exists some tools that can do that sort of thing, but I don't really have one. So what I decided to do was to actually use a drill bit, but not in the way I was just describing. Instead of using this end that has the pointy tip, flip it around and use the back, which has a nice squared off end. To get it to actually shape the plastic, instead of spinning it like you normally would with a drill bit, you might be able to tell from looking at this what my approach was. You can see it's slightly discolored at the end there. What I'm doing is heating up this back end of the bit until it's glowing, and then I carefully push it into the plastic just a tiny bit until it leaves about the right depth of hole. And then I set the bit aside. Got a little piece of tile here that I can put the hot bit on so it doesn't melt my mat. And then it leaves behind, it melts the plastic and kind of pushes it out of the way, right? So it leaves behind little mounds of plastic all the way around the hole. And so I let it cool for a minute, and then I come back with a knife and carefully scrape away that mound of plastic, and then just do a little bit of sanding to flatten it out. As you can see, the scuff marks from the sanding I did. And the result is good. I like it. I need to do that for the rest of these, so I'll show you how I'm doing that. For obvious reasons, I'm not going to hold the drill bit in my hand while I heat it up. So I've got some locking pliers here. So I lock the bit in until it's nice and solid. And I've got a little butane torch here that I'll hit that with, like I said, until it's glowing. And then the hardest part about this is just I'm just doing it by hand, and I get one shot at it, so I've got to make sure I go in as perpendicular to the surface as possible so the hole is circular, and make sure I don't go too deep. And I have to get the bits centered on the little mark that I've made. So let me show you how that works. This is going to be a little tricky on camera. Let me adjust the camera so you can get a better view of this. Okay, there you see it. As you can see, there's quite a bit of plastic that got pushed up to the sides. We just have to clean that off. I've got a hobby knife that's got a square blade, which is good for this. I do like this because it is flexible. So that allows me to push down, and then the blade is a lot closer to parallel to the surface and less chance of digging into this recessed area, which I don't want to mark that up any more than I have to, but just go slow. There we go. As you can see, that gets rid of most of it, but it just still leaves a little bit of a bump behind. Try and get a little bit more with the knife. Sometimes it helps to go at it from a different angle than the first cut. That gets most of it off anyway, and the rest I can just clean up with some sanding. But that's the idea. Just rinse and repeat. As you can see, it comes out looking pretty good. I finished with these little hole features. For the first few that I did, I got them pretty much perfect. But for a handful of the other ones, I ended up making them a little deeper than I wanted them to go. So I decided to kind of backfill them a little bit with putty and then re-dig them out. And I just used the same drill bit that I used to melt the hole in the first place. And just kind of dropped it into the hole and spun it a little bit. It only took out a tiny bit of putty at a time, but that was fine. I just took it slow. That way I was able to control the depth better and make those shallower like I wanted. So the other detail that's missing from this area of the model is that there's supposed to be a recessed line that runs along next to those holes. And you can see I've started to put that in. And the way I'm doing that is getting a bit of tape and using my little scribing tool with just a sewing needle inside of a pin vise and run that along the edge of the tape just like I did for scribing the panel lines. Okay, as you can see, I've done quite a bit of work on this portion of the model. I've finished up with the little circular features inside of this trench, and also I finished scribing in that line that goes all the way around. And I'm pleased with the results on that. I've added all of the photo etch parts that I'm going to add on this portion, the transporter emitters, and the large windows. There are more photo etch parts that come with the Green Strawberry kit for this area of the model. There are photo etch parts that replace this feature here and this one here, and then also this feature here and here. And I've decided not to bother putting those on because I think the molded in versions of those features look just fine. I don't think that well, let me show you. So for these, I think they might be cargo bay doors. They're already pretty well defined, and I don't think that the photo etch feature or the photo etch part really adds anything special to those that they don't already have. So I just didn't feel like it was worth the effort of having to fill these in just to replace them with that. So I decided not to. And then for these sensor bands or whatever they are, again, just the photo etch is good. It's nice. It's a nice part. But I think what's here is just fine. So again, not really worth the effort it would take to remove those features to replace them with the photo etch pieces. So I'm just not going to. And then, of course, the phaser banks have been replaced. You can see the difference in color there. These are the 3D printed parts that I made. Man, I tell you, it was a lot of work to remove those. It was a pain because it was just messy and noisy and took a while. Like, I just have little bits of plastic all over my work area and all over the floor and everything. I'm going to have to do some major cleanup when I'm done with this model. Well, even before I'm done. Once I'm done grinding things away, before I move on, I'm going to have to clean it up because it's driving me crazy. It's a messy process. So to glue these on, I think I mentioned this before, but I just used some extra thin super glue, and it just flows in to the cracks and holds it on there. And then on the back, I flip it over and backfill this gap here. And I've just been using just some canopy glue. It's like a strong PVA, like Elmer's glue type stuff. You can also see these are some spots where I tested my process for making these circular features, where I heat up the drill bit and melt it with the plastic, melt the plastic with it. I didn't know if that was going to work. I just kind of came up with that idea on the spot, so I tested it out. So I tested it out on the inside of the model here, where you wouldn't ever see if it, happened to do something to the other side, which it didn't. If it had melted through, this part is going to be internal to the model. You'd never see this once it's assembled, so that was a safe place to do that test. Anyway, so like I said, cutting these out for the phasers, it's not too bad for these smaller phasers. It wasn't too bad, but for these long ones, huge pain. I did find it easier after I had done one of them. I did find it easier to actually go through and use a drill to clean out, this is a good portion of the material. It's a good percentage of the material that needs to be removed. And that was a quick and easy process to do that. So I found that much better to do. So I've already done that here. So on these halves of the secondary hull, I started drilling out this phaser strip. And by the time I got to about here, I realized that if I just kept going, it's going to leave a huge gap all the way across there. And then it would kind of compromise the structure of the piece. So this part would no longer be kind of one solid piece all the way across. There'd be a gap there. And it would be able to kind of flex independently, these two areas. So as soon as I realized that, I just stopped and figured, okay, I'll not clear those out. When I still remove the phaser strip, there's still going to be if there's any material left, it would be very thin material here. And you can see that on this one, where I've already removed the material. What's left you might be able to see is quite thin. I did go back in and use some strip styrene to reinforce that. There was enough material that it didn't completely break away, but I could see light coming through it, so I could see how thin it was. So I decided to just reinforce that. I've finished the phaser strips here and on the warp pylons. Those are done as well. So all the phaser strips are done except for these two main top ones and then the ventral, which I'm not going to be able to do until those halves are together, which I don't think that's going to come up for a little while. Another detail that I've worked on is on the fantail, aft portion of the ship. There's a set of photo etch windows that go here. On the original mold, there was a feature here, but there were no windows. It was basically just this rectangle right here was, instead of being curved like the side of this all the way around, it was just flat across there where that rectangle is. And that was all that was part of the original mold to represent this feature. And so it had to be cut out, but it's supposed to be a little bit deeper, not just like on the surface, not just on the outer surface of the hull here. It actually is supposed to recess in there a little bit. So I just cut away some of that material. I haven't actually glued these two halves together, so I can show you. I've also done some work on the windows for the secondary hull. I started to do some photo etch here. I'm not going to be able to do all the photo etch just yet because most of the photo etch on this part of the ship is down here right on the bottom. These features that kind of run along right there on the seam. There are a bunch of photo etch parts that are associated with those, and they just don't have... It just doesn't make sense to put those on until I've got both halves together and I've cleaned up that seam to kind of basically make it so that seam's not visible anymore. Then it would make sense to put the photo etch pieces on, so I won't be able to do those for a while. But I did do the little window, recessed windows, large windows. One thing I noticed when I was checking photos of the filming model is that this set of windows down here was not as recessed as it is on the mold of this kit. This kit had it way back inside there. The original really deeply recessed, like seriously, almost like this edge came all the way back into here like that, and then went down. And so it was actually like the windows themselves would have been much more vertical than they are here, and it was, really deeply recessed. And I noticed that the filming model was not like that. It was more like what we see here. So I adjusted that. And I've also added in some sheet styrene, these white portions here. I added in some sheet styrene to kind of help. It's doing two things, really. One is that when I moved this face forward, so it wasn't quite as deeply recessed, like I said, it was much more vertical at first. And then when I kind of cut it outward, I also changed the angle. So it was more at an angle like you see there. And so, just from triangular geometry, right, the hypotenuse is going to be longer than either of the sides of a right triangle. And so the distance that this photo etch piece had to span was a little bit longer. It still managed to, completely span it. There wasn't a gap on the top or the bottom, but it was really close. And when I put the photo etch piece in so that there was no gap at the top, these windows were so much farther up, and there was kind of a big gap, like the bulkhead beneath the windows was like so much taller. The proportions just didn't look right. It didn't really look good to the eye, and it definitely wasn't close to what they had on the filming model. So I decided to kind of solve both of those problems by just increasing the thickness of this top portion. And now I think it's definitely much more in proportion. And then I did the same thing up here. This one was not as deeply recessed. I didn't really modify the depth of this window. It's already, it was good enough. It wasn't as deeply recessed as this one was, so I didn't really have to change that depth or change the angle of the window. But it was still the location, the vertical location of the windows just didn't look quite right. So I just added a little bit of sheet styrene up at the top there. This is thinner though. This was this one here was a 1 millimeter thick sheet of styrene, and this is 0.5 millimeter thick. So it wasn't quite as extreme on this one. But yeah, I like the results. I like the way it turned out. And I just kind of sanded that smooth. I'll have to, once I hit it with some primer, I'll see if I need to do any filling on that and kind of clean up where that sheet styrene is, so you don't see the transition between two different materials. Kind of not happy with this plate here, this photo etch piece, just where that edge is. Like I said, my putty work is not great, and that's going to be a lot of work to try and hide that seam between the brass and the plastic. Not confident that I can do it, and the more I think about it, I'm starting to think, well, okay, maybe I don't need to do that. The only purpose that this plate is serving is it gave me a template for where these other photo etch pieces needed to be placed so that they ended up in the right spot. But that's it. So what I'm thinking is I might actually just remove this whole photo etch assembly from the top here, remove each of these individual little details. They're thicker brass, so I think I should be able to remove these without doing any damage to these little raised details. It will mess up this thinner brass sheet that they're mounted to, but I don't care. I'm going to get rid of that. Instead, I will just then place these thicker details that I do want back onto the original plastic surface, and I can just make some paper templates, or maybe even masking tape or something, make some templates just to kind of help me put those back in their same spots that they were without having to deal with that extra sheet of brass. So, okay, I am trying to carefully remove this top assembly without doing any damage to the parts of the plastic that I'm going to be able to see when this is all done, or damaging the pieces of brass that I want to keep. And it all just comes down to how good of a job I did gluing this on in the first place. Okay, that wasn't too bad. But anyway, I can just use this pattern to kind of help me make a template to place these back onto the plastic for where they were. I think the easiest way to make a template out of this would be to get some wide clear tape, like a packing tape, and put that over the top of it, and then trace out with a pen or a marker or something where those shapes are, and then take the tape off, and since it's clear, you can line it up on this shape here, stick it down, and then cut out the shapes, and either just use that to place the brass pieces on, to glue them down, or mark them with a pencil or something, remove the template, and then glue the brass pieces down. That was my original intent, was to use the packing tape, but I don't have any, and I don't feel like going out to get any, so instead I'm just using some clear sheet plastic that I've got, just a scrap of. I put the brass piece against it. I just used some masking tape to kind of tape it to the back so it wouldn't scoot around. And then with a knife I just carefully started tracing out the shapes, and I didn't cut all the way through at first, so these ones over here have not been cut through. Then I removed the sheet and then started cutting out some of these shapes, but then I noticed that like some of these areas are really thin in between, and so if I continue to cut the rest of these out, I think the template's just going to fall apart. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this long middle piece, and it more or less runs down the center of this deck 1, and so I've kind of measured out and marked a center line with pencil, and I'm just going to eyeball this. I'll just push it up against the curvature, against the back of the bridge structure there, and then line up the back so that it's more or less centered on that. I'll glue that one down, and then I'll come back in with the template for the side that I've already cut out, the right side here, and go through and I'll mark those with pencil, and then I can come back to the template and start cutting out the shapes on the left side, and if this right side starts falling apart, then I don't care, I've already got those marked. So okay, so there's that middle piece. Okay, so now I can hold the template up there, mark those in place. Okay, that should be pretty good. Let's see how it looks with the pieces on there. Okay, something more or less like that. Okay. There it is. I think that turned out good. I definitely much prefer this result than what it was before. Now I don't have that weird edge that I'm going to have to deal with. So, yep, I like it. The time has come to deal with one of the issues on this model kit, and it's this feature right here. On this model kit, it comes out this flat surface comes out from the window and then bends down right here. But on the studio model, it's supposed to be, this flat surface is supposed to come out from that window all the way till about right there. And it kind of intersects the curved face of the main hull in a different spot. And it's kind of hard to tell, but what's happening here is that this face, instead of coming straight out from the windows, is actually coming kind of kicked up at an angle. So as you move away from the window, it kind of gets higher. And that means it's intersecting this face in a different spot. And so that leads to this weird kind of bend in the surface here. Ian Lawrence addressed this particular issue on his model by cutting away along these lines here and then cutting out at the front here and then bending the face down, leaving a little bit. He didn't cut all the way across this seam. He left a little bit in the back on both sides here, and that meant that this whole thing stays attached to the saucer on those 2 points, and they act as a pivot, so we can just rotate that whole face downward a little bit. Just rotate it down and get it so that this flat face meets up with it more out here. And I originally thought that it would rotate down and meet along this line here, but then the more I thought about that didn't really make sense, because that's already where this line is intersecting that the outer, the curved surface of the hull. So it doesn't, leave it any space for it to rotate downward. So it's got to be further out. And so I kind of looked more closely at what Ian had done, and he had put it almost all the way out to this panel line here. Not all the way, as far as I could tell, but almost there. And so I've just kind of redone that line out here, and I'm just going to ignore this one. Now so this whole piece right here is going to be cut out along the lines so it's almost completely removed from the hull except for those 2 points back here. So you can see that I've already started to cut through there. I made the cut along these 2 lines. And to cut this portion out, I'm just going to use a drill to, just kind of perforate a line following that guideline there inside of it, and then go back in and finish cutting that all the way across. I do want to have a nice clean line here on the outside, so I don't want to, I definitely want to drill to the inside of that line so that I don't leave kind of like a scalloped edge on there. Okay, so that's all cut out now. I'm able to bend that down, and I don't have to bend it much, just maybe about that much. And I started doing the drill thing here, and then I realized, so the line, the original bend was kind of right there, and I started drilling, and when I got to there I realized, this is the material I want to keep, this is what I'm going to chuck. So I should actually be drilling on this side of that bend line, and so that's why I've got this stupid little jog in there. I started drilling on the wrong side, and then once this gets bent down a little bit, there's going to be a gap here that I'm going to have to fill in on both sides. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of filling work and a lot of putty and sanding to try and smooth that out. It's kind of scary, but no going back now. I've done quite a bit of work on this, fixing this feature here. So I removed that piece, the original piece there, and then I cut a new piece out of sheet styrene And I used 1 millimeter thick, or 0.04 inches. And after I removed the original plastic, there was just this hole here. So I held up just a sheet of the styrene behind the hole and then marked kind of that shape and size from the hole itself. And then I was able to cut that out from here. And it did pretty good. It matched up pretty well. The first issue I had was after cutting this away, I think there was some residual stress in the original plastic that now it wasn't being constrained all the way around. It wanted to bend, to bow. So this little piece of plastic right here, this front edge of it that was now free, instead of being nice and flat and straight like that, it tended to kind of curve up. Not a lot, but enough to definitely be a problem for trying to, keep this flat. So to deal with that, I had to add some reinforcing plastic. There's kind of a lot going on here, and I'll explain it as I go. But the first thing I did was add this bit of plastic here that's perpendicular to the original gray plastic. And that's just a scrap, an offcut from this original cut here. So that's why it's got that weird little cut shape to it. It just was what I cut off of the back of this white piece here. So it was just a handy piece of scrap. So I glued that perpendicular to the original gray plastic, and that I put some force on it to force that edge to be nice and flat, and just held it in place for a while until that glue set, and that took that bow out of the plastic. I then went back in and added some more plastic just to reinforce that edge, since it was just this butt weld here, that one joint that was holding all that stress. I was concerned it wasn't going to be enough, so I added on kind of this L-shaped piece here just to reinforce that. So once that was done, the gray piece was nice and flat. The next thing to do was to try and get the new white piece to glue on flat and straight with the original gray piece. And to help me do that, I used some of this stock styrene that has like an I-beam cross section, and it is quite bendy in this direction, but if you turn it and try to bend it in the other direction, it's much stiffer, much harder to bend. So I figured this would help me kind of keep this flat if I glued on a couple of pieces, one here and then another one here. That would help me keep flatness across there. So I cut off a couple pieces, and it would have been great to do that on the bottom, because then I could have just, glued those I-beams on and left them in place, but I already had this reinforcement going across, so that just wasn't going to work. So I had to glue these on the top. Now obviously they can't stay there, so it had to be temporary. I tried to use canopy glue at first, because I figured that would probably be easier to break away once I'm ready to take these off, but it would hopefully hold strong enough to help me get this piece in place. But it didn't really work. As soon as I put any pressure on it, it just popped away. I don't know if it's just because maybe I didn't wait long enough for it to dry, but it didn't work. And so I just decided to go ahead and use super glue to glue that on there. And that held. It held a little too tightly. It was very difficult. I couldn't just crack this away. It really bonded strongly to this stock styrene. And so I had to end up cutting it away and just scrape and sand to get the remains of the glue and the styrene away from this. So that was quite a bit of work to clean that up, but I think I did a good job. I guess we'll know once I get some primer on there if there's any kind of unevenness, but it looks pretty good from here for now. But that did the trick. So I glued those on there, And then I was able to bring the white piece up, and it held it nice and flat while I put some glue, let that dry, came back in and followed that up with just some more strip styrene to kind of reinforce that joint. And then to try to keep it from bending once I removed the temporary reinforcement, I put a little bit of that I-beam just running out the front there, just to kind of hold that straight until I could get the whole thing glued in place. Now that it's glued all the way around, I'm not really concerned about that going anywhere. But I did want just a little bit of temporary reinforcement, so I put another piece of that I-beam. So once that was all in place, then it was still flapping in the breeze, just hanging on by these two little bits of plastic that I didn't cut away. And so I had to line that up with the edge there, and then glue that in place along the front here. And there were a few places where it was a good fit and a few places where there was a bit of a gap, where I just didn't cut the white plastic as precisely to precisely match the original gray cut. So I just put in some little bits of sheet styrene. You might be able to see the remains of some seams there. Yeah, there you go. You can kind of see. Had to put a bit of a thick piece in there. Some thinner pieces along here. But I got that glued in and filled in, and then again just followed that up with some reinforcement in the back. And then the last part was to fill in these gaps here that were remaining from where I cut. The gap was kind of big in some places, where, especially up here at the front, where I bent down more, where the flap bent down more than at the back. And it was almost enough to fit more of this 1 millimeter thick styrene, except for towards the back where it was a little bit of a narrower gap. And so I just used a knife to kind of open up that gap a little more evenly all the way across until a sheet of that 1 millimeter styrene would fit. So I got that in there and filled in a couple of gaps at the back and the front, and that worked really well. And then I just went back in and filled it with some putty, kind of rounded that off. And again, I think it looks pretty good. We'll be able to see better once I get some primer on here. But overall, I think the results are exactly what I was going for. It was a bit of work, and it was a challenge and a little bit scary at times because I wasn't sure that I had the skills to really pull this off. I doubt that it's perfectly smooth, that once I get the primer on there, you'll have no idea that I ever made this change. I think there are going to be artifacts remaining that I'll have to address. So yeah, I'm not expecting this tail to be over. I've got more to do, I'm sure. So hopefully I can do a good enough job that I'm going to be pleased with this. While I was at it, waiting for some of the glue to dry here, I went in and filled in some of the gaps around these photo etch docking ports. Like there was a kind of a large gap here. You can see the white from new styrene, and then a couple of smaller gaps along the side. Kind of messed that one up a little bit, but I'll do some putty work here to kind of help fill that in. So that's probably kind of the worst example so far. The front turned out a little bit better. And then the opposite side, much better. So that's looking pretty good. We'll see how that comes out with the primer. But good results so far. Okay, I think I'm going to call this video here. It's already gotten pretty long. I've done a lot of work on this model so far, and I was excited to show everyone everything that I've been doing, and it ended up being quite a lot of video. And there's still some more work that I have done that I haven't even shown you yet. I've done some work on the warp nacelles that I'm kind of excited to show you, and also on the warp pylons. And it just couldn't fit into this video without it just being way too long. So that'll have to be in the next video. Yeah, I'm excited for more to come. Anyway, thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you next time.